But it's important that we look at what's going to happen today. President Trump has announced he's going to begin the deployment of military troops to Chicago today, ostensibly in support of an ICE operation. But what we have seen throughout the first 8 months of this term is very much that this is a military takeover of these jurisdictions. There's no statistical information stating that there's some kind of nationwide crime wave to justify the deployment of troops. But a couple stats I think people need to understand. In the one big beautiful bill that was passed earlier this year, they passed over $175 billion, billion with a B, in funding for ICE, making ICE the nation's largest law enforcement agency. Something I found out yesterday. Not only is it the nation's largest law enforcement agency, it is the 15th largest military in the world. So ICE is no longer simply an immigration force. It is now a military force. It is a Gestapo here in the States. It is a military policing organization. This is why whenever you scroll through social media, you'll see ads for ICE talking about the fact that they will hire you. They will give you a $50,000, $100,000 signing bonus to become one of their government agents to be stationed in every city. And when you use a issue that is popular, like immigration, we've seen this time and time again. Whenever you're doing an authoritarian takeover of a country, you need a secret police force. And what I think the failing of history has been, we've always talked about these dictatorships and them showing up, but we never talk about how exactly they happen. There's no email that goes out and says, hey man, we're in a dictatorship now. You know, there's no big conference that happens and says, oh, the Constitution is gone. Remember, Vladimir Putin still puts himself up for re-election every few years and follows the Constitution. Saddam Hussein had to go up for re-election. Now, you win by 90% of the vote every time in a dictatorship, but you still keep all the mechanics to make it seem like you still have a democratic and functioning society. In Russia right now, Vladimir Putin is the dictator. But you still have the Kremlin. You still have a legislature that goes and they vote and they make decisions and they pretend they're doing things. You still have a court system. You still have a functioning bureaucracy that takes place. It's just at the end of it, at the top of the mountain, there's only one person who gets to make every decision. So it's not as if they come and tap you on the shoulder and tell you that it's over now. It's just one day you start feeling like, and this is what people in Poland said when they fell to the Soviet Union. They said you start feeling small. You start feeling the walls tightening in around you. You start feeling those little bits that tell you that freedom may not be as free as it used to be. And so I want you to take a minute and think about the current situation that we're in. We've given the president $175 billion to have his own secret police force. You can then deploy that secret police force anywhere in the country and go around what's called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1776. What the Posse Comitatus Act was a agreement as part of the Hayes-Tilden Compromise of the 1776 election that ended Reconstruction by removing federal troops from Confederate jurisdictions. So what the Posse Comitatus Act says is that the federal government cannot put the military into cities to act as law enforcement or as a peacekeeping force without the invitation of local officials or without a federal action taking place. Boom. That's the loophole they found. And this is why when I told you guys a couple years ago to read Project 2025, this is what I was talking about. Because they lay out how exactly this process would work. Once you deploy ICE nationwide to say that you're doing a nationwide mass deportation sweep, well, now you have a federal interest in those cities. So you can deploy the National Guard outside the wishes of the local governor, the local mayor, or any other checks and balances, because those National Guard troops are there to defend the federal work of the ICE agents, to defend federal property, to defend federal buildings, to defend federal highways. And that's how you get around the prohibition against the militarization of cities. Courts just ruled earlier this week that the deployment of the National Guard in California was illegal. But what does that mean when one man has a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court and can force them to do what he wants? If you break the Constitution as the president, you're supposed to be impeached. But can you be impeached if you control the House of Representatives? You're supposed to be removed from office. Can you be removed from office if you control the Senate? Well, clearly the Department of Justice will bring charges. Well, not if you control and put your own cronies in to the Department of Justice. Well, the military, they're going to stand up and protect us against a takeover by a dictator. Well, not if you get rid of everybody in the military who opposed you and put your own people in. You know, you put the weekend host of Fox and Friends in charge of the military. Do you think that person's going to come and stop the president from doing what he wants? Well, law firms, they can sue in court. Not if you use the power of the federal government to sue them into submission within your first weeks in office and make them pay you for the privilege of allowing them to stay in business. Well, the media, the fourth estate from the French Revolution, they will hold him accountable. Now, if you start pulling broadcast licenses, holding up mergers, forcing the media, forcing ABC to pay you $30 million, forcing NBC to pay you, or CBS to pay you $16 million. Well, the universities, we're going to educate the young people and make sure they fight back against his tyranny. Well, not if you have Harvard having to pay you. Not if you're having Cornell University and all the other major institutions, including Emory, just yesterday, bow down to the edicts of this administration to not allow diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and using that as a basis. Because remember, it was never about DEI, it was about control. Using that as a basis to control funding to universities on the federal level and giving them the determination either you can go bankrupt tomorrow or you can bend to the will of one man. Private enterprise, the major corporations, the business interests that run this country, the oligarchs, clearly they will do something. What happens if you stand up against Trump? What have we seen? Regulations. Intel now had to give Trump a 15% stake so they can sell chips to China. He's talked about making even more business deals where the United States government is negotiating these deals and takes a business interest in those deals. Foreign power, our allies, they'll do something. We've seen NATO. We've seen Canada. We've seen Mexico. We've seen them all come and bend the knee to President Trump over tariffs. Tariffs were never about making us money. It was about exerting control over the rest of the global economy. So exactly what checks and balances exist right now? Exactly what is there to stop these individuals from doing whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want? Who is here to inform the public? Who is here to fight back? As Gil Scott-Heron said, it is winter in America, and nobody's fighting because nobody knows who to save. All right, we will be back after the break. Calling 447-226-1380. You're listening to News and Talk 1380 WAOK.